This morning, why didn't Texas see the same level of violence as UCLA, Columbia, and colleges across the country? Was the heavy police response here the right move after all? A question we will ask State Senator Sarah Eckhart. The former Houston Mayor Annise Parker might be getting back into politics to challenge a popular Democrat. New numbers from the Texas border: fewer undocumented immigrants are coming across the Rio Grande. And the Republican race to replace Fort Worth Congresswoman Kay Granger. It is a heated one. Craig Goldman and John O'Shea on what sets them apart and what they could get done in Congress.
Inside Texas Politics with Jason Whiteley starts now.
Good Sunday morning, lots to get to here. Let's start with some of the political headlines that you might have missed. You know, with all the protest on college campuses, a new survey shows what Texans think about it. The UT Politics Project did this poll. It shows Texans support Israel, but they want the U.S. to balance that support by protecting civilians in Palestine. Palestinian militants have killed 1,200 Israelis in last October's invasion. Since then, though, Israel has killed more than 34,000 civilians in Palestine, and the fighting continues. The former Houston Mayor Annise Parker might be getting back into politics after all here. She was mayor of Houston from 2010 to 2016. She served as city controller and on council before that. Well, the Houston Chronicle says Parker is leaving her job at the end of the year and has been talking to friends and supporters about another run for office, potentially running against Lena Hidalgo, who is the Harris County judge. And fewer undocumented immigrants are coming across the Rio Grande into Texas. These are new numbers from Customs and Border Patrol. For the first 3 months of this year, crossings are down from Brownsville to El Paso. But those same numbers show that illegal crossings are up in Arizona and in California. This afternoon, another planned protest at the University of Texas in Austin. But there is something different about what's happening on college campuses in this state when you compare them to others. And that's where we started with State Senator Sarah Eckhart. Her district includes UT Austin, and she has worked behind the scenes to de-escalate that situation there. Senator, welcome back to the program here. College protests across the country we have been watching have gotten a lot more violent than what we saw here in Texas, not anywhere near as violent. Looking back now, do you think it was a good idea to send in such a heavy law enforcement presence to nip this in the bud, maybe so it didn't get any worse?
I do not, and it's for these reasons. Under the First Amendment, you can't preemptively stop speech before it happens. You can manage it from a time, place, and manner restriction and have it neutrally applied. But you can't just say, I think something might happen, and therefore I'm going to make sure nothing happens. So I do believe that the overwhelming, expensive, and frightening police presence was too much and actually had the perverse effect of escalating the circumstance. And we have evidence now of students continuing to peacefully gather on the South Lawn, having teach-ins and discussing their views with regard to Israel and Palestine without the need for large police intervention.
There's another large demonstration planned at UT on Sunday afternoon. Any idea what you expect that to be like?
I'm not sure. I'm hoping to play a role in any way that I can in de-escalating both sides, frankly. The tents were a clear violation of the rules of the time, place, and manner restrictions that UT applies for any protest. So I'm hoping that on the side of the protesters, that we stay within the time, place, and manner restrictions, and on the side of the university, that the administration applies those rules in a neutral fashion without resorting to, frankly, an overwhelming and frightening and expensive police response.
Have you had any one-on-one conversations with the president at UT, Jay Hartzell?
I have had text exchanges with him that are frankly very productive. I have a good relationship with President Hartzell as well as Chancellor Milliken.
Tell us about that. Productive in what sense?
Well, last week we had a very good, very adult and productive exchange about what their fears were and how we might be able to work together moving forward to de-escalate the circumstance. I will confess that since then I have not heard from them directly, which I have some disappointment about. But I continue to reach out to them, and I continue to advocate that we use the tremendous resources of the university to have this conversation in a way that builds leadership for the future rather than shuts it down.
Senator, we appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thank you for yours.
All right, let's bring in the roundtable now to talk about the politics of this. Bud Kennedy is here from the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. I am Mitra with us from the Texas Tribune in Austin. Bernadine Steptoe, political producer at WFAA in Dallas. But I want to ask you the same question I asked the state senator there. Well, why were the protests here so different? We didn't have the fallout, the brawls, the SWAT team response that they had in other places. Was the police response here the right answer after all?
Well, you can say the police response was too much, but the police went out and set the tone and said, we're not going to bring the war in the Middle East to this campus. We're not going to let people come out here and deliver a violent message. There's no freedom to promote violence. And so they did set the tone. Too much, too hard, maybe so, but it also served to prevent trouble.
And you and your team have covered this extensively down there in Austin. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, it's a difficult situation to be sure, and obviously, the UT Austin president Jay Hartzell is kind of, in seeing what's happened elsewhere at Columbia and the encampments, was determined to kind of not let that happen at UT and invoke the aid of DPS to supplement the police down in Austin. And so he's hearing it from both sides, praise for not letting it escalate, but also was it an overreaction in advance of something? And so it's a kind of a tough thing to predict, but it's a kind of a no-win situation in terms of how to respond proactively.
Bernadine, of course, this is not over with, but is Greg Abbott a political winner in this?
Well, as I've always said, we don't know yet, because what they're doing, it has not stopped them from protesting. So we really don't know what could happen in the future. But I think that one of the things that was mentioned is that you're almost in a no-win situation, in that you are stopping legal protests, but you're not having the violence that we've seen elsewhere. But it's not stopping them from protesting. But they're still going to protest.
And they are still protesting. Does Abbott look like a winner in this with what he's asking DPS to do?
Well, the DPS did not look good the first week. It didn't look very good this week. A lot of people raised issues of, look, why didn't you rush in like this at Uvalde? The handling of the TV videographer in Austin has raised a lot of questions. But Greg Abbott does not come off as the totalitarian that young people might like to portray him.
And the Uvalde comparison is certainly a good one. That a lot of people are making a point about that too. A lot more ahead here, including this. Take a look. When we come back here, questioning the candidates who want to replace Kay Granger in Congress. Why didn't John O'Shea vote for 20 years? Is Craig Goldman really a rhino? Both of them take our questions. And why did Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton attend Donald Trump's trial in New York last week? Lots more ahead here on Inside Texas Politics. Welcome back to Inside Texas Politics. A little more than 3 weeks now until the runoff elections. This morning we are going inside the Republican race to replace Congresswoman Kay Granger. This district stretches from Fort Worth to Weatherford and over to the edge of Mineral Wells. Two men on the ballot here, John O'Shea and Craig Goldman, the frontrunner, who we are starting with this morning. Craig, good to see you again here.
Good to see you too, Jason.
Republican voters are going to see both your names on the ballot. You guys share many of the same Republican positions, but how would you say that you are most different from your opponent, John O'Shea?
Well, it's basically, in my opinion, who's more qualified, who has a record. I have a proven conservative voting record in Austin that I want to take to Washington, D.C. I have a proven record of problem solving, of getting things done, and I'm going to roll up my sleeves and go to D.C. and work just as hard as I have been in Austin.
He has a lot of ads out there. He's talking a lot about you being a rhino, a Republican in name only. What's your reaction to that?
I think any voter should go look at our records. And I have a proven conservative record. It's why Greg Abbott has endorsed me. It's why Dan Patrick has endorsed me. It's why former Governor Rick Perry has endorsed me. I have a proven record on all the issues, a proven conservative voting record.
Your opponent is really trying to characterize this race and saying it comes down to the vote on impeachment, on impeaching Ken Paxton, the Attorney General of Texas last year. He supports Paxton. Paxton has endorsed him. What do you make of that as a characterization for this race?
Well, I think people need to be very clear about what we voted for. We followed the Constitution. Put before us was the question of whether or not Ken Paxton should stand trial. Not one of us in the Texas House voted that he was innocent or guilty. Based on the Constitution, we were basically members of a grand jury. Does he, based on the facts given, should he stand trial? And so not only did the Texas House agree with that, the Texas Senate agreed with that, because that's the very first vote that they took before they proceeded with the trial. Is there enough evidence for him to stand trial?
Whether to accept the case.
Whether to accept the case,
Yeah.
exactly.
Do you regret that vote at all?
No, not at all.
Let's talk about Congress here. This week there's going to be a vote to oust the Republican Speaker, Mike Johnson. Several Republicans are upset that he passed aid for Israel, Ukraine, and Taiwan, along with Democrats as well. If you were in Congress right now, how would you vote?
I would certainly not oust the Speaker of the House. 8 Republicans sided with all the Democrats to oust Speaker McCarthy. I thought that was a wrong thing to do. When you elect a speaker, that's your leader of your party during that session. That's who you should stick with. I think it's just causes chaos. And so I certainly would vote to stick with Speaker Johnson.
If elected, top 2 priorities, what are they?
Top 2 priorities, hands down, shut down the border. I mean, again, hopefully we'll have President Trump back in there to where we have federal assistance with shutting down our border.
And when you say shut it down, I mean, explain what that means, because Texas and Mexico are the 2 largest trading partners.
Yeah, but we have an open, porous border. I was down there a month ago, Jason, and literally we were up in a helicopter within 1 minute. We watched 35 people crossing the border because, again, the Federal Border Patrol has been told, don't do your job. And so they cross the border. They're allowed to stay in the United States. They're processed, meaning fingerprinted, some are ID'd, and told come back in 2 or 3 years for your asylum.
But what is so what does shut down the border look like?
Well, it means when whoever you catch crossing the border, you send them back to the country where they came from. You start there. You don't allow them to stay in the United States of America for 2 to 3 years, letting them go freely wherever they want to go, not knowing who they are, where they came from, or what whether they're terrorists or not. So you start there. You catch them, you send them back to the country where they came from, you tell them to go through our legal immigration system the way we have it. Second issue you asked about was, hands down, we've got to get a handle on our budget. We have a $34 trillion deficit, the largest deficit in American history. That is a joke. That's ridiculous. We shouldn't have that sort of debt. That's on the debt. We're not paying that. Our kids and grandkids are going to be paying that over time. We balance a budget in the state of Texas. We should have a balanced budget in the United States of America.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
John, welcome to the program here. We spoke with your opponent just before this. I asked him the same question to begin with. When I ask you, how would you tell Republican voters you are different from Craig Goldman?
So State Representative Goldman rightly points out that this is my first time seeking public office, and so I don't have a record to run on, but what I can say is I'm an outside business person who's concerned with the way things are running in D.C. as well as in Austin. Whereas State Representative Goldman clearly does have a voting record and has been part of the leadership team under the current House Speaker Dade Phelan. So I would suggest that if somebody is interested in common sense outsider who's an America First type candidate, and will stick to core conservative values, I would be in that lane, whereas Mr. Goldman would represent more the traditional Bush wing of the party, and like I said, has been part of the leadership team down in Austin now.
Your opponent called out your voting record as a public record people may not realize, and said you hadn't voted from 2000 to 2019. That's a 20-year deficit there.
Well,
why not?
Actually, I have. My last name has an apostrophe in it, and so prior to leaving the country, I don't know if they had me with the apostrophe or whatever, but it didn't pick up when I came back and re-registered. There was, however, about a 4.5-year period where I was out of the country. My wife had brain cancer, and I was in effect a single parent. And so in my campaign, I say it's God, family, country, and it's in that order. So that is correct. I did miss the 2016 and 2018 elections.
But you voted from 2000 to 2016?
I voted for George W. Bush both times. I voted for Mitt Romney. I voted for Senator John McCain. I did.
In Congress this week, there's going to be a vote to oust the Republican Speaker, Mike Johnson. Some Republicans clearly upset that he worked with Democrats to pass the aid bill, the foreign aid bill for Ukraine, Taiwan, and Israel. If you were in Congress right now, John, how would you vote?
So, candidly speaking, he made a very public promise that he would close the borders before considering aid to Ukraine. There's also the Hastert rule that says that when the majority of the majority are against an issue, it doesn't get brought to the House floor. On top of that, that aid package also had over $3 billion to expedite people being brought into the country from the Middle East. And I frankly can't find any justification for that.
So you wouldn't vote to keep him? You'd vote to oust him?
Actually, as things stand right now, that's the direction I would lean, yes.
Let's talk about Ukraine for a moment. You suggested, I believe I read, that you don't support sending any more money to Ukraine. Is that the case?
Right. Yes.
Tell me why.
Well, let's just speak about the practical matter first versus even kind of what the ideological issues are. But the practical matter is Ukraine had a peace deal on the table almost 2 years ago, which would have put them in a much better situation where they are now.
But they would have to cede land in that peace deal.
They're
part of the country,
the
right?
reality is they're ceding land regardless, and over 500,000 people additionally died as a result of the continued fighting. And there can be a case made that there are people in the eastern portion of Ukraine who are ethnically and Russian-speaking people that were being attacked by paramilitary organizations from the western part of Ukraine. So it's a complex issue. My whole thing is put an end to hostilities right now. And if I think Vladimir Putin is not going to be willing to give up the land, and I don't see that there's any amount of money or any amount of weapons that are going to replace bodies in the field.
Do you support calls for an immediate ceasefire in the Israel-Hamas war?
No, I do not.
Why not?
I believe that Israel should have their own determination in how they protect their sovereignty of their country.
But you just said in the hostilities for Ukraine and Russia, but this one's a different case?
It is, to me, the situation in Israel is that they're being asked to negotiate a ceasefire with people who've pledged to eradicate them as a nation. From the river to the sea isn't a call for a Arab state within the nation of Israel. It's a call for the actual abolishment of Israel as a country.
John, thank you.
No, my pleasure. Thank you very much.
The roundtable is ready when we return here. And to keep up with Texas politics during the week, subscribe to our podcast. It is called Y'all-itics. New content, fresh interviews. Episodes drop every Sunday morning wherever you get your podcasts.
This is Inside Texas Politics with Jason Whiteley.
All right, time now for Reporters Roundtable to put the headlines in perspective. Bud, Ian, and Bernadine are back with us now. Let's talk about something we didn't discuss very much this week. Attorney General from Texas, Ken Paxton, Bud, he was in New York to attend the criminal trial of Donald Trump. Well, is that a publicity stunt or anything more than that?
Well, of course, he gets some camera time, but maybe he was thanking Donald Trump. Donald Trump took credit for him getting not being removed as Attorney General, because Trump wrote on Truth Social that it was all his doing that Paxton wasn't removed. But maybe Paxton's being kind of a role model for Trump. I mean, Paxton faced 20 accusations. He is pretty much stopped fighting 5 of them, and he's gotten away with, in his criminal cases, he's paid a couple of $100,000, not go to jail. Civil cases still in court. He hadn't gone to jail a minute. Maybe he's a role model.
Maybe he's some good luck, perhaps, Ian, for Donald Trump.
Boy, that's an interesting take. A role model.
Who knows?
Take.
What do you make of that, though, Ian?
It's a continuation. Paxton was there on January 6th speaking in Washington for Trump, and Trump was very outspoken and, kind of took credit for saying that he helped Ken Paxton and, win his impeachment trial. So this just seems to be a continuation of them being, showing their support for each other.
Were you surprised? So you weren't surprised at all then, Bernadine, that he went up there?
He's always supported former President Trump. During the
but
January...
support is one thing, but flying up to his criminal trial and walking in front of the cameras is something else.
Well, he flew up to the Capitol during the January 6th, and he spoke. But you know what I thought when I saw him is perhaps he's auditioning to be vice president. That's what I thought, because he's everywhere. And that role model,
so you think I'm off on role model, but you're saying he's going to be vice president?
He'd never walk up Dan Patrick's back
I
for
did
that.
not. I did not say that he would be vice president. I said perhaps he's auditioning to be.
We're out there.
Yeah. Now that's
Yeah.
That's interesting. Let's switch off and talk about AI, Bud, artificial intelligence. You can't use that to write papers in schools. Why is the state then using computers to grade the STAR test there? We can't even use computers in some places to count ballots.
You know, the state is going to save $15 million by having computers grade the tests. You know, they supposedly on the STAR test, they will feed graded tests that have been graded well and show the computers what a good test result is like, and then the computers will look for the rest. The computers can't do the ones that are in Spanish. The computers can't do the ones that have any kind of odd language or answer. But, you know, this is just saving money, and it remains to be seen whether the state, whether the parents will accept it. If you don't like the way your test is graded, you have to pay $50 to get it regraded.
And these are evidently only English reading computers.
Yeah, and then you know, the officials overseeing this will be, you know, quick to tell you that you know, look, there will be kind of some, you know, this is not just completely automated. There is human kind of backstops here too. But as Bud pointed out, like if you don't believe that your test was graded fairly, you got to shell out $50 that you may or may not get back just to kind of see if it actually did grade properly.
Wow.
If the computer's so smart, why doesn't it have Google Translate? Sorry.
Well, and then also that's putting upon the parent to know that something is wrong. You might not necessarily understand that particular subject, so you have to look at your kid's grade. It's okay, something is wrong, but what's wrong? And also, you know what? To save money, they're going to use our kids as guinea pigs because this is not a proven project. This is not proven. But no, and it putting upon the kids to know the test and all of the...
And the parents to know the grade too. I mean, I can vouch for fifth grade math is harder than I remember when I'm working with my son right now, trying to figure out some of these questions. Before we go, let me ask you this, Bernadine, though. Getting back to our very first interview here with Senator Eckhart, do you think the student unrest hurts Biden here in the final moments?
Yes.
You think so?
Well, and the reason
because he hasn't addressed it, or what?
Well, because he's getting a lot of pushback on how he's handling the issue, period. And so the longer you have the protest, the more it puts on him not handling the issue.
And to see whether he addresses it is something we'll be watching this week. Thank you for joining us for Inside Texas Politics. We're back next Sunday. Hope you can join us then. Take care.